Good evening, and welcome to Fox.
There's an elderly woman who lives in a middle-class Florida suburb. She's 4'10", weighs 130 pounds, looks like a grandmother, and is one. She's also in jail.
She used phony names, she used phony addresses, she used young men to sell the drugs for her. She never carried drugs herself. She was really just a ruthless, greedy leader, a female Al Capone.
For the past 4 months, we've been investigating a story about a seemingly ordinary woman, a 54-year-old mother of 4, grandmother of 3, who lived with her children in a middle-class suburb of Florida. But she's more than a mother and a grandmother. Could she possibly be what the feds are calling her? A female Al Capone?
Al Capone. They are wrong, very wrong. The U.S. intelligence has their head up their ass.
To look at her, you would never imagine that Educati Ceballos is anything but an aging housewife. From her short, stubby frame to her dishpan hands to the way her eyes well up when she talks about her children.
My children are the saddest part. I hope they can run away from the evil because the innocent are always blamed.
This poor little 5-foot-tall woman was a ruthless, greedy leader of an organization that was distributing multi-kilogram amounts of cocaine for a very long time, making enormous amounts of money.
And Al Capone.
A female Al Capone.
In June, Educati Ceballos became the first woman to be tried under the federal kingpin statute, a new law aimed at the overlords of the drug underworld. For those found guilty, it mandates life without parole. Mrs. Ceballos was charged with supervising a ring of 90 people who allegedly moved $1 million worth of cocaine a week. A ring that last year alone brought 3 tons of cocaine from Florida to the New York area. A ring that made so much money that the cash had to be weighed instead of counted. A ring that feared Mrs. Ceballos so much that when they were arraigned in court, they followed her hand signals on whether to speak or not. Can you look me in the eye right now and tell me you've never been involved with drugs?
I was shocked when they came out with that whole story.
She was the leader, that none of the business decisions were made without her approval, that none of the workers listened to anyone but her.
With the Reagan administration declaring war on the $100 billion a year drug industry, the kingpins have had to change their tactics. This may be the new face of organized crime.
Now they have taken a different route. They are your next-door neighbors. Some of these enterprises are done by families, mothers and sons and fathers, daughters. They all get involved in it.
The most important way in which Mrs. Ceballos is a female Al Capone is that she was the head of just the kind of organization that has the potential, if it's not attacked and eliminated by law enforcement, to become the La Cosa Nostra of the 21st century.
According to court documents, Educati Ceballos, who stands no taller than the average 5th grader, had all the big-time contacts and fronts of a major league cocaine dealer. Her source, the notorious Medellin cartel, which is thought to supply 85% of all the cocaine smuggled into the United States. Within the cartel, she had about 15 different suppliers. Ceballos allegedly bought cocaine in $500,000 lots. She arranged for it to be brought into the country in computer screens and even in the front covers of encyclopedias.
The binders of the encyclopedias could be cut open and cocaine had been compressed, and they would just bring in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volumes of cocaine. With the computers, the cocaine was hidden behind the screen, and because computers are very fragile, computers ordinarily would not be opened and checked.
In Florida, Mrs. Ceballos reportedly used drug money to set up legitimate businesses: a car repair shop, a jewelry trade, a beauty parlor, and a small music production company. According to the government, all of the businesses lost money and were kept only to show a legitimate income. In the body shop, investigators believe, cars were fitted with secret compartments to move the cocaine across state lines. The jewelry business was used as a source of gold, the payment of preference for many of the ring's suppliers. At the point of distribution, hair dryers were used to dry the cocaine after it had been cut with other chemicals. Members of the cabal used cellular phones to communicate with one another. And when they spoke of drugs, they talked in codes.
Pieces of pizza, little girls, little boys, dresses, tires, any code word that would fit into the flow of the conversation that they were having.
Are you sure you're not reading too much into this, that maybe pizza wasn't really pizza?
Absolutely not.
And on top of it all, Mrs. Ceballos was a shrewd businesswoman. Testimony claims she paid most of her people an unprincely $500 a week. And although she never used cocaine herself, investigators say, Mrs. Ceballos would set aside 2 to 3 grams out of each kilo as a personal stash, which she could sell herself without having to pay anyone.
They all top each other telling lies, the police, the government, because they don't want a Hispanic or a Colombian to have something. Even if a Colombian buys 1 ring, they are shocked and assume it was bought with drug money.
At first, everyone wanted to believe that Grandma Ceballos was innocent. In fact, when federal agents, undercover, came back with the suspicion that a 54-year-old woman was at the helm of a cocaine empire, their bosses told them they were wrong. Go back and look for the real kingpin, they were told. So they did go back, and they found clues. Clues that refocused the attention on Mrs. Ceballos. Ridgefield Park, New Jersey is a blue-collar suburb of New York City, a neighborhood seemingly as far from the drug world as it is from Florida. Not long ago, neighbors here started to notice unusual activity around this house, the one with the wax begonias in the front yard.
They seen people coming and going, you know, all hours of the day and night. So you know they don't belong here, so you know there's something suspicious going on.
The neighbors began to see a pattern. Invariably, people would park their car, make a call from this payphone near the VFW hall, then enter the house and emerge with a shopping bag.
They went in with a bag and they come out with a bag. Could have been anything, really, but there was just too many of them and people you never saw before, you know, total strangers.
Leo Maximowitz made repeated calls to the local police. Eventually, one night, a state police detective went through the house's trash. It paid off. The detective uncovered snips of duct tape and wrapping paper with traces of cocaine. The feds got the payphone wiretapped. That tap led to a network of cellular phones, which members of the drug ring thought couldn't be tapped.
Some of the wiretapped conversations, you will hear the defendants saying that, hey, they're just like walkie-talkies. There's no wires. They can't pick us up. They now do know that we can tap cellular phones quite well.
The tangled network centered on 6 houses stretching across New York City and northern New Jersey. All were identified by investigators as stash houses, distribution points for cocaine. But this house seemed to serve as a funnel for the entire operation. A house in Hollywood, Florida, a sprawling 7-bedroom ranch. The neighbors here were suspicious, too.
They paid $165,000 for the house in $20 bills. So he said he was in his lawyer's office for several hours counting $20 bills.
And there was more. The neighbors also noticed an estimated $500,000 of improvements to this home. A tiki hut barbecue grill, expensive mirrors made out of etched glass, a buzzer system to screen would-be visitors. And at night, wild parties.
They were very arrogant. And we'll park, 25 cars out in front of our house and with the salsa beat all night long. And you want to sleep, that's your problem.
This gussied-up house in Florida was owned by Educati Ceballos. She and her family were having the times of their lives. But on November 17, 1987, it all came crashing in on them. The feds simultaneously raided the Ceballos home and 6 stash houses in New York and New Jersey. 21 people were arrested, including Mrs. Ceballos and her son, Hector.
This was just like a TV show. flak jackets on, the pots, automatic weapons, and a tow truck, you know, going to jerk the bars off, going down the alley, bolt cutters, and they covered that house like a blanket.
After an 8-month investigation costing tens of thousands of dollars and involving 10 government agencies, the feds had their big fish, a grandmother. Now meet the family of this so-called female Al Capone, the family that Educati Ceballos may never mother again.
It makes me feel like I don't want to live no more. You know, they take my mom, my brother, my whole family. They trash my house. They leave me with nothing.
George Sanchez, Mrs. Ceballos' youngest son, is in hiding, even though the police are not searching for him. We tracked him down at his secret hiding place in Florida, a run-down apartment complex behind a spare tire and a rusting bicycle. When he recalls the morning of the raid, George becomes angry.
I threw myself on the floor, then like 6, 7 guys jumped on top of me. They put wires on my hands, and they just hit me. I couldn't talk to my sister, to my grandfather. My grandfather's 78 years old. They cuffed him. He's blind. They threw him against the table.
Look me in the eye here right now and tell me that every nickel you've made was made honestly.
I don't know how could they say that. We didn't have to use no drugs to make our money.
The friends and relatives of Educati Ceballos defend her to the end. All, that is, except one. His name is Juan Diego. At 28, he is a rising star in South America. He still has a hit on the Latin charts. Juan Diego was arrested with Mrs. Ceballos and was charged with being a courier for the Ceballos drug empire.
When I first met them, I didn't know that they were in drugs. They seemed like an honorable family, and they always respected me. The problem was that once I became suspicious and discovered they were in drugs, I didn't care. I only cared about my career.
Mrs. Ceballos believed Juan Diego could become a Latin superstar, the next Julio Iglesias. She lent him the family's etched glass living room for use in this music video, and even arranged for her son to produce his record album. Juan Diego was so highly regarded that when Belisario Bentancur, then president of Colombia, visited President Reagan in 1985, the State Department invited him to sing at the official welcoming.
Did you meet Mr. Reagan at that time?
Sí, no tuve la oportunidad de hablar. Yes, I didn't speak with him, but I had the opportunity to meet him.
Juan Diego began to think of Mrs. Ceballos as a mentor, a friend. He now feels that was a big mistake.
One of the things I should have done was distance myself, left, but I grew attached. It was an error on my part, and even after I knew, I didn't want to leave them.
Juan Diego hopes to receive a reduced sentence in return for cooperating with the government in the case against Educati Ceballos. Within a few months, the house that Coke built had crumbled. The feds impounded the Ceballos home. Only the lizards were left.
Because they repossessed my home, the kids are wandering around homeless.
There's nothing we could do. Something we worked for. Our dream. Now we don't have nothing.
On June 3rd at the federal courthouse in Trenton, New Jersey, Mrs. Ceballos went on trial. The charge? Acting as the principal administrator of a continuing criminal enterprise. It carries a penalty of life in prison. This is her court-appointed attorney.
The hardest thing in the world is to gain the confidence of your client, especially when you're an appointed attorney. The second hardest thing is to get them to trust you to the point where they'll tell you something meaningful about the case, especially when they're facing either life in prison, mandatory, or the death penalty.
Furlong points out that no drugs were found on Mrs. Ceballos or in the stash house where she was arrested. But day after day, a mountain of seemingly irrevocable evidence piled up against her.
She used phony names, she used phony addresses, she used young men to sell the drugs for her. She never carried drugs herself. She was really just a ruthless, greedy leader who quite honestly deserved to be prosecuted to the hilt.
I'm like a scared little mouse in the corner.
In the course of our interview, Mrs. Ceballos became feisty and adamant. She called the judge hearing her case a frog. She even began to berate her own attorney while he sat just 5 feet away. Our interview over, the jail warden led this so-called female Al Capone back to her cell. Once she was there, her attorney agreed to return to our cameras. Incredibly, this is what he said when she was out of earshot.
Look, 90% of my criminal clients lie to me. The other 10% are insane. She is not insane.
On September 19th, a jury of 9 men and 3 women found Mrs. Ceballos guilty of being the principal administrator of a major drug network. Under the new law, she faces a mandatory sentence of life without parole. She may appeal. 3 co-defendants were also found guilty. They're awaiting sentencing. Hector, Mrs. Ceballos' son, and 15 others pleaded guilty either before or during the trial. They're hoping for lighter sentences. And Juan Diego, who also pleaded guilty, hopes to be back in a recording studio as early as next month.